Hello and welcome to our presentation, Critical Analysis of Post-Bureaucratic Organizations. My name is Michael and my colleagues are Sissi, Denisa, Sabrina and Lea. Now let's start with our agenda. At first you will hear a bit about bureaucracy and bureaucratic control. Our second part will be post-bureaucratic control and organizations. Then we will talk about critiques from a social humanistic perspective, and our last point will be critiques from an economic functional perspective. We do also have an interactive part and we'll come to that afterwards. But now let's start with our presentation. Bureaucracy is based on the legal control stated by Weber. It is characterized by the fact that, as an organizational form, it differentiates between the work profile and its tasks and the social role. By that, also new control mechanisms were introduced. Behavioral control can be used to monitor, evaluate and reward them. Outcome control, when behaviors cannot be measured but the outcome. Input control is used when there are no performance standards or information about the job's performance requirements. These forms can also be used combined. The principles of bureaucracy are firstly the hierarchy. The effectiveness of those individuals lower down is defined by the individuals higher up. Then the rules for the management that give the instructions to guide the daily work processes. The impersonality individuals are seen as the role they embody in the organization. And, last but not least, the reduction of job profiles to technical qualifications which are decisive for employment. When we summarize this again, then the pro-arguments are initially the motto sine ira et studio, which means a non-judgmental approach, the process of selecting applicants according to their skills, the equality of all within the organization, the clear structure and recording of all work processes, and, last but not least, rationality, purposeful thinking and action. On the opposite side is the one-way vertical communication from top to bottom. Then there is the delayed decision-making caused by the rigid structures. These first 2 points also make it more difficult to achieve innovation and creativity and lead to inflexibility within the organization.
As we already heard about post-bureaucratic organizations in some lectures in the past, this should be just a little reminder to refresh our knowledge. So, post-bureaucratic organizations are characterized by informal structures, individual autonomy as well as flexibility and fluidity, rather than the hierarchical principles and strict defined roles we heard about in the first part of our presentation. As we know, a significant characteristic for post-bureaucratic organizations is the open structure of them. There are no strict boundaries, which means that different resources can flow in and, of course, also flow out. In post-bureaucratic organizations, employees are asked to connect deeply with their work and therefore feel responsible for its success themselves. So one of the main turning points was the idea of creating a motivated environment by shared values, beliefs, assumptions, and in the further a shared identity or so-called organizational culture. The focus must be on problem solving and not on rules and regulations. So we are talking about an organizational structure where it is about the ability to influence rather than power, the way of persuading someone instead of overrule them, and where it is about knowledge and shared goals rather than a high hierarchical position. But of course, this requires relations and especially a lot of trust within the organizations and the team. The assumption is that when there is a real connection and belief into this shared identity, constant control, as under the bureaucratic form, is no longer necessary. However, control is still an issue and only appears in a new, different way. One could say that control is shown in a less obvious way and is not that consciously perceived anymore. The post-bureaucratic style of control shows in different ways of normative control. So this way of surveillance makes the worker responsible for him or herself while following certain principles within a given framework. In contrast to bureaucratic organizations, It is about principles and guidelines, but not about rules. This allows people to behave more flexible and interpretively. The frame could, for example, be shaped by the organizational culture. The literature also defines the so-called socio-ideological control, which attempts to control worker beliefs. So this results in workers feeling flexible with their decisions, but of course they will remain within the defined limits as they are actually influenced by the control of their beliefs and as their behavior is actually regulated by the management. The self-managing employees in post-bureaucratic organizations bring, of course, changes for the roles of the managers, as the power and also the possibility for decision-making depends on the problem or, for example, a certain project, and not on hierarchical positions. Managers are now responsible for a smooth collaboration with both internal teams and external stakeholders. Different theorists also use the term waiver to describe managers of post-bureaucratic organizations. So waivers are on the one hand responsible to organize networks, but on the other hand also play an important role when it comes to sustaining them. They do that by identifying gaps in knowledge resources or where access to new resources may be necessary, and this leads then to further development of the network. Another important role of the managers is the one of the facilitator. But what I want to emphasize here is that the facilitation role is dedicated to development and independent and interdependent behavior that encourages increased autonomy and self-determination among learners. As an example of both bureaucratic system, I would like to present you Agile project management and Scrum. So Agile projects are handled iteratively and incrementally, which means that the project is done step by step and also possible results built on previous ones. So one way to apply Agile project management is Scrum. Scrum makes it possible to manage and control software and product development in rapidly changing environments by following major activities and components. When applying Agile project management, one has to know that every team member is on the same level in a sense that there are no strict hierarchies. Every member of the team must take responsibility for the project and is allowed to make own decisions, find own solutions, and is therefore able to work autonomously. An advantage here is definitely the flexibility, concentration on knowledge and expertise, and also the possibility for individual time management. For a better understanding, we here have a picture showing the people involved as well as the process of Scrum. The project team consists of various people with different roles. One role is the one of the product owner, who is responsible for maximizing the value of the product and the work of the development team. The role can be compared with the one of a functional manager. The Scrum Master is the one to be equated with the team leader and another 5 to 10 people who form the development team. But the leadership within the team is not fixed and the people manage themselves to a very large extent. There are 5 major activities: the kickoff, the sprint planning meeting, the sprint itself, the daily scrum, and the sprint review meeting. Each sprint starts with planning and ends with a post-mortem. In the sprint planning meeting, the product backlog, which defines the requirements of the project, as well as the aims of each sprint, are agreed upon. Furthermore, the sprint backlog is created, which contains the activities that need to be performed to meet the requirements of each sprint. Once the sprint planning meeting has been held, the sprint itself can begin. Each sprint lasts no longer than 4 weeks, and also the daily Scrum meeting takes no longer than 15 minutes and includes the Scrum Master as well as the development team. At the end of a sprint, the sprint review meeting is held. As our group learned from a case study, applying Agile project management can bring effectiveness as well as limitations. Especially power relations sometimes fell into an old pattern. The opinion and suggestions of team leaders' point of view tend to prevail over the one of the other employees. While the key components of the applied methods were considered and taken into account by some of the employees, they unfortunately were resisted by others. So that means that post-bureaucratic methods and theories also can have disadvantages. And this brings us to the next part of our presentation, and I will now pass the word to my colleague, Leah.
Thank you, Sabrina. Now I'm going to tell you some things about the critiques on post-bureaucratic organizations from a social humanistic perspective. We've heard a lot about the post-bureaucratic organizing through flat hierarchies and informal aspects of organizations. One main criterion of doing so is the belief in efficiency increase through omitting formal regulations. And the assumption behind that is that solutions for arising problems can be found even more faster, and that more flexible ways of informal organizing can be discovered. So we're going to switch to a Foucauldian approach right now to have deeper insights. And in Foucauldian terms, social order is not naturally given. It is constituted in the relations of power and the production of truth within these relations. So we're also talking about a discursively constituted reality. And I hope, as you all might know, about different forms of organizational settings, as well as different forms of control mechanism. So one way of distinguishing organizational settings is viewing the allocation of tasks and authority. And first, I'm going to talk about organizational settings where rather standardized and routinized tasks are assigned and where authority is rather linked to images of hierarchical leadership. And later on, Denisa will tell you about knowledge professions and project-based teams. One critical approach in a Foucauldian tradition, and the one we chose, is the contemporary conception of social control. And this refers to the construction of a discursive reality, and it manifests in the social actions and practices of the socially, or in our case, organizationally individuals. And the goal is to achieve rule and norm conform positively valued behavior. And as you can see on the slide, the core categories of social control are discipline, surveillance, monitoring, and sanction through formal or legal as well as informal ways. And in the best case, this is always resulting in self-discipline, self-control, and self-management to avoid sanction from the other organizational actors in case of deviation. So because I want to avoid sanction, I will behave according to the rules because, yeah, who likes that, you know? And as we all know, organizations face a lot of uncertainties within themselves, but as well as in the environments. So social control tries to use risk prevention as a core function of control to create certainty in the environments and in the actions of the organizational members. So just as a little example, Frederick Winslow Taylor saw as an entrepreneurial risk not achieving value-creating activities, and that should be prevented through his conceptualization of scientific management. So he wanted to eliminate the risk through calculative planning. Through this certainty creation, also transparency and visibility are created, as well as comparability. And so we're talking about panoptical principles, so like the construction of an organization or the situation, like openly working stations or office rooms or digital information systems. And in consequence, the production of this certainty ironically creates uncertainty as byproduct. And in a nutshell, that means, just an easy explanation, that one never can be certain of being constantly monitored, what leads to self-discipline and self-control. And so coming back to these organizational settings, control is distributed because employees are enabled to monitor each other, so in a peer-to-peer manner. And the other one is the internalization of self-control or socialization. And this all, this can reduce the monitoring effort. So this also can be reduced to the implementation of digital arrangements, like I told you before, and clocking in an out at work or capturing the daily output on systems like SAP, or through in implementing digital interfaces like laptops or mobile phones, where employees can monitor each other's actions. And in theory, that means that human manager control instances only have to step in action if deviant behavior is discovered. So I hope you all can still follow me, because now we're going one step further. Because I was talking about this flexibility organizations want to have, and to this achieving entrepreneurial flexibility by the omission of formal rules, uncertainty is emerging for the enterprises, and they often bypass this through job deregulation. And this job deregulation can put employees in very precarious life situations through all branches, from shop floor to high profession. And this increasing job insecurity goes in line with the shrinking core workforce. And so as a result, this extra work, because the work still needs to be done, is often compensated through leasing or outsourcing. So we are talking about precarization. And this precarization also can be interpreted as a disciplinary mechanism, which leads to self-discipline as well as self-control and even management to even stay able to keep a job. In a broader social context, these tendencies also increase social inequality. And just as an extreme example is provided by the IMB case, because around 2010, IMB introduced a reorganizing program called Generation Open, and they tried to outsource and modularize intern subtasks to a crowd of volunteer freelancers, and they put these tasks on an open platform, and every freelancer with the required skills were able to work on a solution for the requested tasks, but only one result, one output is chosen and rewarded by IMB. So in other words, may thousands of freelancers worldwide invest time and effort in IMB's tasks for free, without any health or any social insurance, without, guess what, formal regulation. So if these people want health or social insurance, they have to step in action on their own and pay for private insurance, what may not be possible for everyone. So what is really efficient? So following this, and I hope you all are still with me, we also have some important consequences for the construction and or the constitution of subjectivity and identity of the social actors within an organization. And I was referring to digital information systems regarding this panoptical principle as a tool for monitoring. So we are really close to the discussion of the measurement and the use of quantified and metric data. Through monitoring behavior and through monitoring the execution of work tasks, the output, etc. And by putting this observation under quantified or metric logics, the evaluation of employees becomes possible. So in Foucauldian terms, we would talk about subjectification through objectification. So as an explanation, so like the image I draw of myself, so the image I have of myself stems out of the rating of my performance in reference to my efficiency, if I have done well or not. So it's not my personality what counts, or the subjectivity objective competences that are valued that I have. It is my individual performance as well as my identification of myself. I do not draw it anymore out of hierarchical positions or whatever. I draw this identification of myself out of this measured and objectified performance, which in the end constitutes the perception of myself and my subjectivity. So it is based on what other people tell me in metric ways. So I hope you can follow me. And through this evaluation based on metric data, individuals can be classified in a stratifying manner, but also enables organizations to decide upon life chances and opportunities of organizational members, of collaboration partners, or those who want to participate in an organization. And organizations do that just in concern of their own profit and efficiency increase. So employee evaluation can also be interpreted as a disciplinary mechanism, even sanction instrument, in case of observing deviant behavior through authority instances. So in these organizational settings I was talking about, and I know I did not really focus on a specific one, but I hope you were all able to follow the sense and the input I just wanted to bring over. So in these organizational settings, trust is highly replaced by the instrumentalized control and the reputation, as well as the awareness of being monitored and rated itself has disciplinary effects on the individual behavior. So now Denisa will tell you more about knowledge professions and our project-based teams within post-bureaucratic organizational settings.
I will now talk more about the critical aspects of project and knowledge-based teams. There will be a few examples from the case study of Maravelias about a Scandinavian insurance company to lead to a better understanding. So, the first issue is identity construction. Identity is a social construction. That's because the identity is a product of the individual's environment and its interactions with that. Decision-making is also related to the identity construction of the employee. The post-bureaucratic organizations require two characteristics from the employee. On the one hand, the employee has to be flexible. That's because the fluidity of the working relationship, so the employee goes from one project to another. So he or she must be flexible and adaptable. On the other hand, the employee must be a portfolio worker. He should not commit himself to one area of work, but only characterized by his transferable skills. This means that the worker has his personal skills in which he is good and can always use them in the most diverse projects. This is strongly related to trust and predictable actions. The organization trusts that the worker will apply his skills in any area of work, regardless of the context. But moving from one project to another contributes to a fragmented and fluid identity. With each new project, there is a new framework of subjectification and identification. So always having to adapt and reorient oneself can be very challenging or even exhausting. Next comes the pressure of having to keep up with colleagues. In the Maravelias case study, a manager of an organization made the following statement: "If you do not constantly take initiatives, come up with new ideas, if you do not work long hours and constantly prove that you are a trustworthy participant, you would probably end up in a small corner somewhere. No one forces you to do it, but you still feel that you have to." So, the individual himself takes voluntary responsibility. Again, the worker himself decides to take initiatives and to work overtime. The reason for this could be uncertainty and lack of confidence. So that's why they work so hard to build up trust. But due to this pressure and stress to get involved a lot, the employees find it difficult to maintain a balance between work and non-work. The next point is the lack of an organizational culture and regulations. Due to the fluidity and constantly new projects, companies lack a strong organizational culture. Furthermore, there aren't many regulations. This leads to more value being placed on trust and identity. To make it clear, trust in this context means an intra-organizational trust, so trust among the employees of a company. The organization gives room for subjectification, so that the worker can bring in his or her personality and interests. The individual must be able to share its values and ideas. If the worker shares his identity with his co-workers, the co-workers can get to know him better and trust him more. Furthermore, the personality and social relationships of employees can become a benefit for the company or a project. An organization gives the impression of transparency. The employee feels observed and judged by his working environment. This leads to the fact that he or she will always work professionally. However, the individual must decide for himself what is private and what is professional. The employee is required to bring its personality in the company, but only as far as it serves the efficiency of the company. So this is the responsibility of the individual to manage himself. It is a balance between role-making and role-taking. The employee should be able to do its job effectively, while being trustworthy and authentic, but also professional. The next aspect is about the employee's freedoms. In the Merivalius case study, the manager of a company also said that first the employees are given the time and freedom to explore the company so that they can form relationships with colleagues and pursue their interests. This gives the employees the choice of who they want to work with and in which projects they want to participate. This leads to the project being perceived as the individual's own. So, since the employee is not assigned to a team or a task, he or she has to take the initiative and assume a role. So because of this great freedom, workers are trusted to make autonomous and responsible choices and actions. This is a form of predictability and is influenced by the social structures. So if you can predict the actions of the employee, then you trust that he or she will not do anything wrong. Thus, trust is the most important factor in post-bureaucratic organizations. You trust the workers to act correctly and efficiently without strict regulations. So that trust has become a new form of control. And one can conclude that freedom is of great importance for this control. It's a control through professional freedom. However, these great freedoms increase uncertainty and responsibility for the individual. The last one is more about this professional freedom. So, what appears to be less control in the company as a result of lack of structure is in fact the opposite. The control is less apparent but more intense. That's because due to the lack of strict regulations, the only control body is the observation among each other, which is why the individual employee makes an even greater effort to work efficiently and thus earn the respect of his colleagues. In the case study, the president of the company reported on his responsibilities within the company. So he does not make any decisions about ongoing projects. His job is having meetings with the individual teams. In them, he inquires about the plans and ideas of the workers. The president asks them questions that make them think. The aim is to give the workers different points of view. The president tries to twist their arguments, but it is not sure what the result will be. In summary, the role of the president is to encourage the workers to come up with new ideas. However, he himself does not make the decisions on how they should carry out the project. So, by referring to the flat hierarchies in post-bureaucratic organizations, there is no clear control authority in the companies. Therefore, responsibility is distributed. All employees are responsible for their roles and their success in the company. Now Sissi will tell you more about the critiques from an economic perspective.
Thank you very much. Good morning also from my side. I'm Sissy and I'm going to talk about the critiques from an economic functional perspective. So first, self-control, self-discipline and self-management. At some point you will have an increase in workload and you have to work overtime if it's paid or unpaid. Therefore you have to manage yourself and make a commitment to give up private time or life. Panoptical surveillance set level to work efficient and on time. So there's an average you have to deal with, and then you have to discipline yourself in order to reach that and work on that target. Often it's demanded that you should work flexibly in occupying situations as before Christmas. Therefore, you have to manage yourself in order to fulfill all tasks. Also, willingness to be flexible and seek to create new things should be in the self-management because you want to make something new out of it. Second, the social control. Trust and solidarity is prerequisite for work. So if you're working in a team, you're trusting the others and they are trusting you in order that work can be controlled and you can work together. Enterprise resource planning systems are a contrast to exploitations of employee empowerment. It means that bureaucracy is coming back in a kind of way because ERP systems are working logically and those systems nowadays have almost every organization. The network formation, as in teams and new roles, is important because with the social control, you always have to adapt to new situations and to new people, which will help you in your future. So now I'm going to talk about freedom within the organization. Bureaucracy is still in use in legal structures. Therefore, in the organizational environment as laws, contracts, or relations with suppliers and customers, you always have to go the normative way. The mix of standardization of panoptic control and employee empowerment is an increase in reliance on team working. The implementation of the ERPs as an own technologic, so you will have a hybridization of the organization. The trust. Trust is key mechanism for regulating the employee-organization relation. So if you trust the organization is trusting you as well, and you will have the best way in communicating with them and also setting your goals. Community-based relationships of trust among organizational members is necessary in order to work in a team successfully, but also in order to control the others socially. The role of the manager. Management now is based on values, aspirations, and open boundaries. You don't have a manager who is your direct boss, but then you have a new unknown manager who is the algorithm. The algorithm is in your computer and he will measure your clicks, your efficiency, and also the quality. So therefore he will provide some output to the HR department. The uncertainty and insecurity of an organization. Now we have compressed decision-making processes. With them you will save time through leaving aspects aside or out of the past. But therefore you also have to take into account possible memory loss because you don't take into account which was in the past. Rapidly changing and diversifying means of information transfer and storage of the old information. So the information is changing, but you also have to storage that and you have to remember where it is placed. Constitution of identity. In post-bureaucratic organizations, you probably have less tempting career goals due to the flat hierarchies. You cannot become a manager that easily because there aren't as many job positions available. You're a requisite of social capital and the social control, therefore you have to have your own strong character. The organizational philosophy towards the strategic HRM includes you if you're an outstanding person who can lead the whole team towards a new direction. Responsibility. It's possible that ahistorical policymaking could be made if it's significant or unwanted through group dynamics. So if you don't take into account the old data, it could happen, but also it could not happen. With the organizational hybridity, the ERP system has to fulfill its legal structures, and you as a team have to fulfill your tasks in order to get the best for the organization. Efficiency. Compressed decision-making processes can lead into new innovations with outside-the-box thinking. Short-term policy making can help you to adapt to new situations. Rapidly changing and diversifying means of information transfer and storage can help you in the way to work best, but also to have many other ways of dealing with a situation. The challenge of knowledge management. Remembering is time consuming and not functional. Therefore, the storage of the knowledge is done, but you don't have to remember it by heart. Memory damaging caused by false documentation or no documentation. So this is directly connected with the knowledge management. If you documentate something wrong, then it's gone forever because the people after you won't remember it because they weren't there. Software and algorithms used as panoptical surveillance, knowledge transfer, and tool for customer satisfaction. So with the algorithms, you always know what your worker does, where your worker is, and how fast he's working. For that, those informations can, for example, get to the customer, and he will know how fast your product will be there or how fast your product will be produced.